Before we begin, can I remind you to turn off or silence your cell phones, please? How can you hear me now? Before we begin, would you please silence or turn off your cell phones? Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the monthly Member Speakers Series. If you're wondering where Lee Lopez is, I'm not him. He's feeling a little under the weather, so he asked me if I would make the introductions today, and I was delighted to do that for him. Today we have the privilege of hearing from a relatively new member, Benton Bowen. Benton grew up in a farming community near Statesboro, Georgia, about 50 miles west of Savannah. He lived on a farm that had been home to 6 generations of the Bowen family. Benton graduated from the University of Georgia Pharmacy School and owned and operated an independent pharmacy in Griffin, Georgia, where he married and raised his family. He and Mary met and married in 1994 and retired to Sun City, Bluffton after selling his pharmacy. They enjoyed 14 years in Sun City before moving to Tie Point in 2023. So now let's hear more about his 32-year career owning a small-town independent pharmacy. Join me in welcoming Benton Bowen.
Thank you, Penny. I'm glad to see everyone here. This is, I've been looking forward to this for some time now. I'd like to begin by telling you a story. Spring was in the air in South Georgia, in a sleepy farming community called Register, whose single row of red brick buildings, a flat top and 10 awnings had not changed much in recent years. Oh, the street running by the stores had been paved and the bank had closed. The depot that had stood by the railroad track was no longer there. But the people had not changed. Everyone was just the same as they always were. The air was heavy with a sense of pine. There was a turpentine still in the woods near the town, and farmers brought in their resin, pine resin, to be stilled in the turpentine still. The black locomotive showed through town twice a day, pulling 2 boxcars and a caboose, and leaving a low-hanging dark cloud behind its path as it made its daily trip, a round trip, between Statesboro and Better. The war in a faraway land called Europe had not affected this community, and the attack on Pearl Harbor was still more than a year away. But this little town had stayed the same for years. Next door to the Baptist church, a young woman, heavy with child, sat on the front porch of a framed, unpainted house as she and her husband rented the first 2 rooms near the street. Little remained of the pile of firewood that stood stacked by the door, but winter was almost gone, and the little pot-bellied stove in the bedroom would be all that reminded them of the cold weather that was past. It was Saturday afternoon, and the husband was home from work. As he and the woman sat together on the porch, the population of Register, Georgia was about to increase from 300 to 301. This is the world in which I was born. And this world is in South Georgia, about 75 miles from here, just up Interstate 16. who,
Hold on,
okay,
I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I'm blaming it on the storm. But your story's so good. I don't know why it's doing that.
Benton, I don't recognize that part of Georgia.
no,
Sorry.
it's foreign to me.
I'll find it if you just want to keep talking. I'll get it. Can you tell me your story? And, okay,
Okay, we'll continue here, without the slide. The next slide is a map of Georgia, showing where things are that I'm going to be talking about. But, most of you probably know where these things are. You'll hear people talk about Georgia as being North Georgia or South Georgia. And they're very different. And then, so there's quite a distinction between the two. North Georgia is hilly, rocks, red clay soil. South Georgia is a coastal plain with sandy soil. And the dividing line between them is about through the middle of the state, running from a southwest to a northeast direction, from Columbus through Macon to Augusta. There's a big elevation change in this area. This is a strip about 20 miles long or wide, and the elevation changes drastically here. So all the rivers flowing from North Georgia down toward the Atlantic Ocean pass through this area, and they all have waterfalls along this line. Therefore, this line is called the fall line. It's south of it, there are gnats are a huge problem. There are no gnats north of the fall line. So some people in Georgia call this the gnat line instead of the fall line. Millions of years ago, the Atlantic Ocean came all the way up to the fall line. The beachfront property was along between Macon and Augusta. As climate change occurred, the ocean pulled away and leaving all of this sandy soil that was excellent for growing crops. And the warm climate made agriculture a thriving business there. And today, the main business in this area is agriculture. My family lived in this area. I'm part of the 6th generation that's lived on this same little piece of land. And sorry. And for the first 83 years of my life, I've lived within 150 miles of where I was born.
Yes.
Now, my dad loved the land, and he never wanted to be anything but a farmer. He began sharecropping when I was young for an uncle who owned a piece of land nearby. Now, sharecropping is a way of farming for people who do not own land. A landowner provides land, fertilizer, seed, and fuel, and the farmer provides the labor. And in the fall, when the crops are sold, the money is split evenly between the landowner and the sharecropper. Well, my dad was sharecropping for an uncle as I was a youngster. But when I was, let me go back. Somehow, my mother instilled a thirst for knowledge in me, and I read every book in our little elementary school library, and I will forever be grateful to the ladies in our community who taught a bunch of country kids the basic ABCs of getting an education. My dad was one of 8 children, and he grew up in a house that his grandfather built. It was built of pine lumber that was grown and sawed right there on the property. My great-grandfather had a sawmill there. And Dad was one of 8 children who grew up there. And most of my dad's brothers and sisters lived near enough that they could come back home and visit on the weekends. And so every weekend, 4 or 5 of my aunts and uncles would be coming back home to visit. And it was like a family reunion every weekend. My grandfather fed about 20 people. He had hams and chickens, and just the table was full of food. And this was an every Sunday occurrence. And I had 12 cousins, and we just spent Sundays around the farm. And it was a great place to grow up. On Sunday afternoons, when my cousins were there, the things that we explored were, there was a smokehouse behind the house that had hams and sausages hanging from the rafters. There was a boiler shelter that had a big, here we go.
Thank you, Caleb.
Okay. I'll run through some of the pictures right quickly and catch up.
Sorry, sometimes it takes a 22-year-old brain to do
Anyway, this,
There you go.
this is the area right here where the 16 is, where I was born. And the fall line that I was talking about runs right through here. And everything south of here was once part of the Atlantic Ocean. And everything north of here is the hilly red clay of North Georgia. I've got to find out where I was now. Okay. Well, the boiler shelter with the big cast iron pot that was there, where we sugar cane that we brewed to make syrup was cooked, sugar cane juice to make syrup, and when it was hog killing time, the hogs were butchered in the bar shelter in cold winter days. There were two big barns, one for the mule and cribs where we kept corn stored. They were hay lofts full of hay. We just climbed all in these barns and made castles out of bales of hay, and it was just a great place to grow up. There were boxes on the wall for the hens to lay eggs in. But little did I realize, though, when I was doing all this, that one day I would spend my teenage years living there. But when I was 13 years old, my grandfather died, and the farm was divided into 8 sections, one for each child. Not everybody wanted to live on the farm, so my dad bought the shares from 4 of his brothers and sisters, and we moved to the country. Now let me see what pictures. Let me move this one down a little bit. Oh, this is my second grade elementary school class. Every kid in this picture either lived on a farm or his father was a farmer. It was a bunch of real country kids.
Where are you?
They're all right.
Look at
Yes.
No beard.
No beard. This is the house that my great-grandfather built that we all grew up in. And all the barns and all the outbuildings were scattered all around there. I never rode a school bus to school in Statesboro after we moved to the farm. And for the first time in my life, I met kids who grew up in town, whose lives were so different from mine that I knew nothing about them, about their life or anything, because we did not have the same experiences. Well, the following year, our family had a tragedy. My mother, at age 41, was killed in an automobile accident. And she had been a stay-at-home mom, and she did everything to raise us kids and keep the house. She did the cooking and the freezing of the vegetables and the jelly making and the laundry and just everything that goes along in the farm. And my dad took care of the crops. Well, my mother she sewed clothes for us, but after she was gone, I had to pick up a few extra chores, and I learned to do a few things that have served me well through life. I learned to sew buttons on shirts, and learned to darn socks, and learned to cook a little, and all of those things have been useful through the years. My daily chores, one of them was feeding all of the farm animals. We had a mule, a milk cow, chickens, pigs, and their diet consisted mostly of corn that was out in the barn. And I fed the animals every day. I learned early on that the animals eat before I do. That was the first rule. And so every afternoon, that was my job. Our mule, her name was Kate. She had belonged to my grandfather. And her duties had been greatly reduced now because tractors were available, and the tractors now did a lot of the jobs that she did. But during tobacco harvesting time, she had a job, and it lasted for 2 or 3 months. And in the winter when we made cane syrup, she had a job turning the cane mill, grinding the cane. Well, one day, Kate taught me a lesson that has stuck with me forever. We were in the tobacco field one morning, and she was hitched to a sled, and in which we pulled tobacco leaves from the field to the barn. And my job, I was just walking along beside her to tell her when to turn and where to go. And as we neared the end of the row, I grabbed her bridle and went to pull her to turn her, and she stopped. And she looked at me, and she wouldn't budge. She just stood there. And I yanked and pulled on her bridle, and I couldn't get any kind of response from her. She finally, very gently, picked up her foot, put it down right on top of my bare foot. With enough pressure that I could not move. I just stood there. I finally got the message. Then she turned and looked at me, just straight in the eyes, never blinked. I got the message. I turned the bridle loose. She picked up her foot, and then she did her job the way she knew how to do it. And this little boy followed her to the barn. Every spring, we bought baby chicks. Little chickens about so high. And they were delivered in a cardboard box with air holes in it. They were delivered by the U.S. mail. Can you imagine that? Well, we went to the post office to pick up our chicks. And we brought them home and we put them in a brooder that my dad built out of plywood and wire. Had a bare light bulb hanging in it for heat on cold nights. And we fed them growing mash. And those little chicks began to grow, and eventually they got big enough we could take them out of the brooder and put them out into the yard with all the other chickens. And they foraged for seed and insects. And they found a home there in the yard. And over the course of the summer, they continued to grow, and eventually they got eating size. And one by one, they began to disappear from the yard, and they ended up on our dinner table. The hens were not bothered. The hens, they were secure. As long as they laid eggs, their job was safe. When I was 10 years old, Santa Claus brought me a rod and reel. And when I was 12 years old, he brought me my first shotgun. So after that, we started having quail and dove and rabbits on the dinner table occasionally. My dad loved to fish, and fishing was something that the whole family could do. So we would go fishing at some time, most every week, and we always had fresh brim and bass on the dinner table. It was just a way of life. Cotton and peanuts and tobacco were our money crops. Let me find, this is tobacco. The tobacco season lasted from about February to August. In February, we bought little plants from a nursery, and put them in a bed, covered it with a cloth to protect it from the frost. And when the threat of frost was finally passed and the plants kept growing, eventually they got tall enough that we could transplant them out into the field. And we transplanted them into rows in the field. And the tobacco plants continued to grow through the summer, and up until about June, they reached a height of around 6 feet. And once they reached their full maturity, they started growing flowers on top. You may see a few like here. Beautiful white flowers. You would have been proud to have them in your flower garden. But we weren't happy to have them in the tobacco field. They were taking nutrients away from the plant that the leaves needed. We wanted the leaves to be as heavy and as big as they could. So we went through the procedure of topping the tobacco, which you go through the field and you break the flower off of every tobacco plant in the field. And the leaves grew, and most of the plants had anywhere from 16 to 18 leaves on each plant. And we picked them one leaf at a time as they ripened. The ripening process was they're losing moisture. Tobacco plants have a lot of moisture in them. And if they lost moisture, the leaves turn yellow, just like any plant that you have that gets dry and turns yellow. The leaves turn yellow. Well, these down at the bottom these lower leaves start turning yellow first. And it just gradually goes up the plant. And over the course of about 7 or 8 weeks, the leaves going up the plant turn until about at 8 weeks the top leaves will turn. So we pick the leaves when they first turn yellow, and the first picking is we get about 2 or 3 leaves off the bottom, and we take them to the barn and then where they're dried and cooked. Actually, this is a tobacco barn, very typical of the ones that we had. And they were about 20 by 20 and about, I don't know, they're too tall. So we had to climb up into the top of them to hang the tobacco. Tobacco was hung in the barn to dry. And it was dried, the drying process was speeded up by heat. Some of the barns in older times had brick furnaces, and they were heated with wood. And eventually in the 50s, we started using fuel oil burners. But my dad would, when they were heated with logs, he would have to sit up all night with the tobacco barn and feed the fire. And this went on like for 3 or 4 nights a week during the season. But eventually we got burners. And this is what tobacco looks like after it's cooked, after it has been cured in the barn. It's a beautiful color, and it's tied onto a stick with string. And after about 5 days, you get the temperature up to about 180 degrees, and it dries. But you have to be really careful with it because you want it to be pliable, but not too dry. It's got to be dry, but still pliable. If it gets too dry, it's brittle and breaks apart, and it's no good. And if it gets too wet, it molds, mildew, and it's no good. So cured tobacco is the real science. Almost every farmer has his own recipe, his own way of doing it. The temperature is adjusted several times a day, and it's just a very complicated process. But eventually you take it off the sticks and you put it on a big sheet and take it to a warehouse where it's sold at auction. All the farmers around have their tobacco sheets lined up in rows, and the auctioneer comes down with the tobacco buyers following it. And buyers from every cigarette making company is coming along bidding on the tobacco. They'll feel of it and check the moisture and go by the color and the smell and all the things they look for. And they bid. And they buy your tobacco right there. And as soon as the buyers leave past your sheet, while you run to the window to get your check. So that's the tobacco process. Harvesting cotton is not nearly as complicated as tobacco. This is cotton. A very, very nice crop. It grows in burrs that look kind of like this, except they're not this big. And they have sharp pointed burrs on them, and they'll stick your hands. But, and to pick cotton, you just reach in and pull the cotton out of the burr. And you put it in a sack that you have hung over your shoulder. And when the sack's full, you take it down to the end of the road and you dump it on a big sheet. Most of the cotton plants are anywhere from about this high to this high. And you stoop over and pick until your back hurts, and then you crawl a little bit until the sack gets too heavy to drag, and then you stoop some more. And it's an arduous job. But at the end of the day, the cotton is weighed, and the landowner or the overseer is out there. He weighs it, and everybody's paid for the cotton they picked that day. And they're paid 2 cents a pound. Most people can pick, a cotton picker will pick anywhere between 100 to 200 pounds a day. So for this day's work, they make somewhere between $2 to $4. That was one of the reasons I left the farm. The first money I ever made was picking cotton. I picked with my grandfather one morning. We went out and he made me a little sack to go over my shoulder, and I picked until I got tired, and he sent me back to the house. And at the end of the day, when they weighed everybody's cotton, he weighed my little sack. It had 12 pounds in it. He counted out 24 cents. I thought he could have given me a quarter, but I didn't earn a quarter. That's just the way it was. After the cotton's picked, it's taken to the gin where the seed is removed and it's put into a bale and sold. So the cotton process is a lot simpler than tobacco. But sometime in the late 50s, all of the laborers who picked cotton, and then there were people who lived in the community who just worked for different farmers, and they decided they could make more money somewhere else. So they all moved to Ohio and Michigan, went to work in the factories. They could work a much easier job and make a lot more money. So there was nobody left to pick cotton, and nobody grew cotton for several years until mechanical cotton pickers came in a few years later, and then cotton started back. But in that time, people started growing soybeans. In the 1950s, farm life began to change a little. We no longer raised chickens, and the milk cow dried up, and we started buying chickens at the grocery store, and milk and butter and eggs appeared on our grocery list because making butter had been one of my chores, and that was always fun. But it seems the fun things disappeared. As you might imagine, by the time I finished high school, I had had enough of the farm. So my dad and I were sitting on the front porch one day, waiting for a rain shower to pass over. And I told him that I thought I would go to college this fall. And it was summertime already. And he said, well, that'll be good. He and I weren't great conversationalists. We never were able to find too much to talk about. But I said, well, I've been accepted at the University of Georgia. He didn't know I had applied. And I said, and school starts in 3 weeks. So in 3 weeks, he arranged to have my uncle and aunt drive me to school, to Athens to school. And as I was getting in the car to leave, he walked up to me and handed me a $1,000 check. He said, this is for your first year. I'd never seen $1,000. And I'd never written a check. But I stuck that check in my pocket and got my suitcase and my trunk, and off we went to Athens, Georgia, to the university. First thing I did when I got to Athens was I walked to town and went to the first bank I saw and told them I wanted to open a checking account. Well, they took my money and showed me how to write a check. Then I went back and started working on the budget. And it worked. Just 4 short years later, I had graduated. I had a diploma and was ready to start on another section of my life. For several months, I had been dating a co-ed at Georgia and decided that I didn't want to move too far from Athens. So I got in my little car and I started driving west. And I stopped at the first town that had a drugstore. Well, I was lucky. That was Winder, Georgia, and it had 3 drugstores. So I went into each drugstore and I looked around. I looked at their inventory and I noticed how they treated their customers. And I looked to see how clean the floors were, where the location. And I decided I was going to work at Farmer's Prescription Shop. Now that's an ironic name for somebody trying to get away from the farmer. But Mr. Farmer owned this drugstore. So I went in and told Mr. Farmer that I'd like to talk with him. And he said, okay. He said, I'll be with you just a few minutes. Have a seat. And he was busy as he could be. The counter was just full of prescriptions. Well, I waited about 20 minutes and I could see that he was not about to catch up. So I went and I said, look, I just finished pharmacy school. Can I help you? So I started working. We worked side by side. So he called up after about another hour. We filled all the prescriptions on the counter. And I said, I'm looking for a job. And he said, when can you start? That was the first and only job interview I've had in my life. Well, I worked there. Yes. And the little co-ed that I wanted to be close to, she and I married. And we lived in Winder for 6 years working for Mr. Farmer. And I spent the entire 6 years learning everything I could about owning and managing and running a business. And I felt I was prepared. And when the time came, opportunity came to buy a drugstore, I was ready for it. And there was a drugstore in really bad shape in Griffin, Georgia. I thought I could turn around. So my wife and my young son and I moved. We left Winder and went to Griffin, Georgia, where I spent the next 40 years. We turned a failing pharmacy into a thriving business. Many of our patients there worked in the textile mill. Griffin was a textile town. And they worked in a textile mill near where the drugstore was. And at age 16, they quit school and went to work in the mill, just as their mother and father had done before them. And these people were honest and hardworking and loyal, and they were just wonderful patients for me. And we became a Bowen Pharmacy, became a place where they could go for medical advice, help, prescriptions filled. They could get friendly ears if they just wanted to talk. It became a family place. I had 3 employees who worked with me for more than 25 years. And it was just, our pharmacy was just a big family. We knew everybody and everybody knew us. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. She did a great job raising our children. We had 2 boys, and we were active in church and civic clubs and school functions and all the things that you do in a community. Soccer matches, tennis matches. Vacation was usually 4 days at the beach in the summer. But as we entered our 4th decade of our life, my wife and I continued to grow, but we seemed to be growing in different directions. We had obstacles we just couldn't overcome. And we finally decided after 21 years that we needed to end our marriage. And so we did. I moved into an apartment near the pharmacy, began putting my life back together again. I joined a gym, began an exercise habit that continues today. It was a lifesaver. I became a member of Toastmasters International and was active in the local and the regional activities. One of the things we did in Toastmasters, we founded a Toastmaster club in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. That was quite an experience. There is no feeling like walking into the federal penitentiary and hearing those metal doors slam shut behind you. I was just glad I could leave at the end of the day. Toastmasters led to storytelling. So I began attending meetings of the Southern Order of Storytellers in Atlanta. I took workshops and developed a repertoire of a few stories and began telling stories, entertaining classrooms in elementary school in Griffin. And I did that for several years with mostly 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders. Well, one day while I was out for lunch, I saw a lady with a t-shirt on that had National Scrabble Association on it. I didn't know there was such a thing. And I asked her about it because I used to play Scrabble when I was a kid. And I found out that there is a whole culture of Scrabble players out there. And she offered to teach me how to play. And so I started reading books about Scrabble, technique, strategies, memorizing word lists, memorizing anagrams. I went all in, started attending Scrabble tournaments all over the Southeast, and went to national tournaments in New Orleans and Dayton. And it was great. Met a lot of people that from all over the country that I would see in tournaments, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. We always had our little rivalries. We knew who won the last time we played. And it was a great career. But I don't play tournaments anymore. I found that rote memorization is not as easy as it once was. I was memorizing the same word list before each tournament, and that wasn't good. But I still have one friend that I play with once a month, but I don't do tournaments anymore. One day in the fall of 1984, a friend told me that her sister had just moved to town from Michigan and wondered if I would like to have dinner with them. Well, the sister's name was Mary, and her husband of more than 20 years had recently passed away. The dinner went well, and Mary and I were married before Christmas. We soon will celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary. I'm going to back up just a few years now and talk about another passion, travel. For most of my life, I've just had a desire to travel. I've been fascinated by seeing the world. When I was about 13 years old, my uncle gave me his set of National Geographic magazines. I had every issue from 1928 to 1952. I read those And I was just amazed by the stories and the pictures and the maps. I took the maps out, lined the walls of my bedroom. My whole bedroom, all the walls were papered with National Geographic folded out maps about this trip. Well, finally, now that I didn't have family that I was looking after, and I had a little extra time, my brother and I, in 1986, flew to Amsterdam with a backpack and a Euro pass, ready to see the world. And I was hooked. When we came home, I started reading travel magazines, travel books. I went to a local college and I took humanities class. I took art history classes. I went to Emory University in Atlanta and took Italian for tourists. I was ready, and since that time, I've been back to Europe 20 times. And I still want to go back. Meanwhile, back at the drugstore, competition was coming to town. About 40% of our business was over the counter, front end sundries, toothpaste, school supplies, all that stuff. Well, Walmart came to town. All of that disappeared. In a short time, we went to 10% of our business was front end. So I was dependent almost entirely on prescriptions for my livelihood. Well, that was okay, but then the chain pharmacists started moving in. There was Eckerd's and CVS and Walgreens and first Kroger, and first one after another. They all came to Griffith. But we handled that pretty well. We had such a rapport built up with our patients. They were dependent on us and they trusted us. And the chain stores had a reputation of having cheap prices. But it turned out that sometimes that reputation was not deserved. And we were able to compete with them price-wise. And our business continued to grow, just the straight line growth as it had done all the years that I had been there. Pharmacy was a great career for me. But after 40 years behind the prescription counter, I sold Bowen Pharmacy to a young guy who reminded me a lot of myself at age 28. And Mary and I moved to Sun City, Hilton Head, to try to find a more active lifestyle in our retirement. In Sun City, I was active in the art club where I painted in acrylics and oils. And I was in the ceramics club where for 10 years I made hand-built pottery. I love putting my hands in the clay. It was terrific. But I still miss pharmacy. So I began volunteering at Volunteers in Medicine here on the island. It's a great organization that provides health care for people who do not have insurance and who do not have the means to pay for health care. And after 13 years, I still spend every Tuesday morning at Film. And one other activity that I still continue today is tennis. I play with a group of great guys 3 days a week at South Beach Racket Club, and just thoroughly enjoy that. But you may have noticed during this time I've been talking that I move from one activity to another. I don't stick with anything too long. I've always been interested in learning. And I feel like that the more things I know something about, the better off I am, and the more appreciation I have for life. So rather than be an expert in one thing, I've just tried to learn as much as I could about everything. In closing, I'd like to say that I have 2 children and 3 grandchildren in North Carolina. Mary has 3 children and 4 grandchildren in Ohio and in Washington State. And we're delighted today to have our daughter-in-law and 2 grandchildren from Ohio with us. Mary and I moved to Tide Point in January and quickly felt at home. We enjoy the activities that are available here and love the friendliness and the openness of all the people. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. And we love the people who are here, and everybody has accepted us, and we are slowly, very slowly learning your names. And I thank you for your attention. There are about 10 minutes left if anybody has any questions I might be able to answer.
How big was the town when you had your farm show?
It was about 50,000.
Oh,
We had about 8 independent pharmacies, and by the time I left, there were about 6 or 8 chain stores. But the independent pharmacists did well there because they were able to compete. The clientele there seemed to appreciate service, and we were able to do very well. Yeah.
Were any vegetables growing on the farm?
What?
Were any vegetables?
Vegetables, oh gosh, yes. We had a huge vegetable garden. I had a row of tomatoes every summer. We had 3 rows that were, 50, 75 feet long. We fed tomatoes to the whole community. In the afternoon, I'd go out with a zinc tub and fill it up with tomatoes and beg somebody to come take them. But we had lots of vegetables. Yes. That was our main. We grew almost everything that we ate except, except flour.
And how old was the mule? Look, how old was the mule when it died?
I don't know. The mule died while I was in college. I have no idea, but she had belonged to my grandfather. At the time we moved to the farm, there were 2 mules. But one of them survived until 1960.
A long time.
Yes.
Very good.
My brother and I still own that land, and we lease it to someone who farms it, and we still go back there occasionally. We have a family reunion there once a year, but COVID has kind of slowed things down. But yes, we still, that farm is right on Interstate 600. When they built the interstate, they took 40 acres of our farm. And so our house is out on the edge of the interstate. You see it every time you go to Lakeland.